Today on Caught for Two, a spoiler-free review of 2 of the 3 play-by-mail games from murdersbymail.com. What works, what doesn't, and why, and how to fix it. Some quick preliminaries before we get started. These are very subjective games. You should take my opinion as just one data point. This will be spoiler-free and deliberately vague, and you should know that I purchased these games myself and have no relation with the developer. What exactly are these games? Well, they are essentially Sherlock Holmes consulting detective style mystery games, except that when you take your turn, you do so on a website, and then you wait a week or two to get a reply in your regular snail mail, which will have the result of the turn you took, and then you'll spend a half an hour figuring out where you want to go next, and you'll go back to the website, type in your new move, and wait to get your reply. So that's the main gimmick here, that your turns are submitted through a website and you wait. There's one more gimmick. I call it a gimmick, but that's not with a negative connotation. There's one more difference between standard Sherlock Holmes, and that is that on each turn you're actually submitting 3 different moves, each of which is made by one of the 3 investigators that you control. And deciding which investigator to send to which location is one of the major new mechanics in this game. The 2 that I have in front of me, one is Sherlock Holmes' Fellowship of Bones, and one is an LA noir case set in 1940s LA. They're both $40. You order directly from the website. The $40 includes shipping and handling and includes the mailings that you'll get. Each game will take about maybe somewhere between 8 and 14 turns. Remember, each turn you'll be waiting a week or 2 for a reply, so it'll take you a good 10 weeks to play through one of these games. You cannot pass it along to someone when you're done. The website will keep track of where you've been. You can only go to each location once. So this is a play it once and then that's it. You can see they come in shipping boxes. So you're not going to be putting this on the shelf when you're done either. Let's open up one of these games and have a look at what you get. I won't be showing you anything that you won't see the moment you open it, and I'll blur out stuff if need be. Okay, so this is what you would get in your box, and this is the stack of replies I've gotten over the course of 14 turns. We'll come back to that in a second. So let's look at what you've got. We've got a newspaper, as you would expect with standard Sherlock Holmes consulting detective. We've got an introduction to the case, which spans a couple pages. We've got a special brochure. We've got a directory, as you would expect in Sherlock Holmes consulting detective. And then we've got a map. Now note, I've been saying Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, but this is developed completely independently. And here's your first sign of that, which is a very different map of London, if you're used to Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, in a different style, but the mechanic is essentially the same. Lots of numbered locations on the map according to neighborhood and number. When you want to go somewhere, you type in the neighborhood and number. And sometimes you'll find places based on, well, this is near this, so let's go there. But often you'll be finding places in the directory, in the newspaper, etc. All right. Both of these games make use of this same mechanic, including the actual 3rd game that I haven't purchased, which is set in 1940s, sort of a Agatha Christie small cottage farm in England setting. But you've got three investigators. In this case, in the Sherlock Holmes one, is Dr. Watson, Wiggins, and Miss Hudson. They have their own different backgrounds and specialties. And you should use those, you should consider those when you decide who to send where. So if Dr. Watson has some medical knowledge, you might want to send him to a place that would benefit from it. And that's one of the interesting aspects of this game. We'll come back to that. And then we've got informants, places that you might send people, similar but different from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, but same idea. And we've got a little brochure here which tells you about the game, and I think we should look at this because we're going to come back to this. So 30 to 60 minutes per turn, that's about right. That's the time you'll spend thinking about your next turn. And here's just a little blurb about how the game works. You get the case file, you decide on your turn, you look at your investigators, you decide which investigator to send where, each of the three places. You send it in and you wait for a reply by mail. When you're ready to solve it, you'll open this envelope with some questions, and then you'll go to a website to actually put in your solutions. Now I do want you to take a look at this thing down here. Always remember, the killer is actively trying to thwart your investigation. Your choices can affect outcomes for characters surrounding the case with legal, romantic, or even mortal consequences. We're going to come back to that. When you're ready to solve the case, you would open up this envelope, which is just a brief list of a couple primary questions, a couple of secondary questions of less importance, or maybe for side cases. And when you're ready to solve it, you'll go to the website and put in your solution. And the last thing here is just a little log for you to keep track of who you've sent where. Okay. And now let's take a quick look at what a reply looks like in the mail. It'll be folded up like this, taped shut. It'll tell you this is reply number 1 or reply number 2. It's sealed up. On the overleaf, you'll see a little mini map reminding you of who you sent where. And then when you open it up, you've got the replies from each of your three investigators. And this is a fairly typical length. So you'll see here's the reply from Wiggins based on where he went, and the reply from Miss Hudson based on where she went. Each of the replies is going to be based, if you send, no matter which investigator you send to the museum, you're going to get basically the same information, same reply. But there'll be some little touches that'll be different based on what investigator you sent. And in some places, if you send just the right investigator, they might get a little extra information. Sometimes it's just flavor changes, sometimes it's extra information. And the LA case is very similar. Let's talk about things that are done well here. The novelty of getting replies in the mail. And they're written as if they're replies coming in the mail from investigators that are on assignment. That works. It is enjoyable to actually wait for the mail to come, and it's exciting to get a piece of mail, and it's just a fun tactile experience to open this letter up and read these letters. So that's the novelty of this format, and it is a reason to want to play this. It is unique. Play-by-mail games used to be much more common a couple decades ago. Now in 2022, it's quite rare. People expect quick internet email replies. So it does sort of throw you back in time. The writing quality of the game, both the Sherlock Holmes and the LA Noire case, are very competent. There are really no typos to speak of. It's a little bit dry and bland compared to the best Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective cases. I'd say the LA Noire case is more compelling. The writing feels more real of the time and more interesting, and the setting is more compelling. The characters are more compelling. The locations are more interesting. The Sherlock Holmes case is on the sort of blander side of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective cases and writing. The system for providing your answers to the questions is a little bit different than Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, and better, more engaging. And the questions are basically the same that you would get in a standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective case, like who killed this person, why, and side case, who was this, etc. But in Sherlock Holmes, you read the questions, you answer them, and then when you get to the solution, it's in the back of the book. There's no use of the internet in standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, and you just read the answers to the questions and how many points you would get for each one. And then you read a long epilogue. Here, the answers to the question and your scoring is weaved in with the epilogue. So basically, you get an epilogue of you being questioned about what happened, and then you'll get to multiple choice questions inside the epilogue. And then when you answer it, the epilogue will continue having given your answer, even if you got it wrong. And then it will continue, and the epilogue story will play out based on your answers. The story won't change based on what you say, but the narrative explanation of the epilogue changes a little bit. And then you just get a score. It doesn't score you based on how many turns you took, etc. Although we had mixed feelings we played through both of these simultaneously, and mixed feelings about how compelling the story was in each of them, and they both have something to recommend each of them. The LA Noire story feels more interesting and engaging, but maybe too easy, and the Sherlock Holmes case was much more dry and bland, but maybe a little harder, and the Sherlock Holmes ending was a little more interesting, and the LA Noire ending felt a little impersonal, and we didn't get to revisit our investigators the way we wanted to. The high point of this system, the really clever element, is the use of 3 investigators per turn. It does a bunch of things. First of all, it lets you visit 3 places on each turn. So you're waiting a week or 2, but you're getting 3 full responses. The idea that the investigators have different abilities and different ways of talking means you've got this very interesting decision each time about who to send where. And that really does add a little strategic element to it. Perhaps it's more of an illusion than a real strategic choice, because basically the replies you get are essentially the same, and you don't need those little tiny amounts of extra info you might get. But it works in creating this psychological choice that you sort of chew over about, oh, that's not the right person to send here, or hey, we're clever, we realize this is the person we should send, and why. Another aspect of this format that works particularly well is the fact that you've got your stack of replies that you've gotten over the course of the game, and it makes it very easy for you to refresh your memory, go back and read through all of the clues you've gotten through the course of the game, and make sure you haven't missed anything. It's a little bit of a shame that the game isn't harder, because then that would come into play even more. But the ability to have this complete log of all of the clues you've read that you can annotate really is a nice change of pace from the standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where your clues are scattered all throughout a book and there's no way to quickly recap for yourself the clues you've read. Let me give you my bottom line here. I was disappointed that these games didn't make better use of this unique play-by-mail format. They felt to me essentially like standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective cases in scope and size, but stretched out, instead of 4 hours, 4 months. And they suffered because of that. I would rank the 2 games we played, Sherlock Holmes and the LA Noire case, as essentially tied in overall quality. I enjoyed the writing and the atmosphere of the LA case much more. And the setting is rarer, this 1940s film noir setting. So I guess that would be my personal preference, but it suffered a little bit from how easy it was. I would, however, as disappointed as I absolutely would play and buy another game from this company or in this genre, this play-by-mail genre, if they addressed some of the issues, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I'd probably pay more. I mean, $40 is not cheap at all for this kind of game. If you buy a box of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Cases, a modern box, you might pay $40 for that, maybe 50, and get a box of 10 cases of similar scope. But of course, you're paying here for the novelty of getting the replies sent to you. On the other hand, you cannot gift this to a friend after you're done with it. So that's it, one single playthrough. But I would buy it, and I might pay more for a more elaborate experience, a longer game with some extra different kinds of documents. We'll talk about that. And I might even purchase another copy of these as a gift. I do think that these make a unique gift for someone who's new to this genre, like a family member or a kid, where the games being easy are not going to be a detriment, and the novelty of getting replies in the mail and the novelty of having a case that stretches out over 4 months that you play in very relaxed form, half hour while you're sitting having a cup of tea, and you don't need to remember things and you don't need to make notes because you can always reread the previous clues. So I think for that reason, this might make a really good gift for a young family member or an old family member who's new to this stuff and would appreciate the novelty. And $40 for a gift that keeps sending them mail, I think that works out well. Okay, let's spend some time critiquing this system now and talk about perhaps ways it could be improved. The first thing to talk about is this broken promise. Both of the games have this summary that says, essentially it says, always remember the killer is actively trying to thwart your investigation. Your choices can affect the outcome for characters surrounding the case with legal, romantic, or even moral consequences. In both of these games we played, over a total of about 30 turns combined, we saw not even a whiff of any of that, anything like that in any form, not even close, and not even any mechanics, any sign of mechanics that could even support such a thing. Essentially, these are plain vanilla Sherlock Holmes cases with no new mechanics, nothing, no events that are occurring. And the only change of deciding what investigators to send where, but boy, there is no sign that anything is actively happening behind the scenes, which is a real shame because the fact that they've got a back-end web server that's creating these replies means they could do what you would normally need an app-based game to do, which is change the replies and the behavior of people based on your previous actions or when you're doing certain things. So really a shame that that's not in here, but also, shame on them for promising that and really having nothing like it in the game. Okay, what else? Everything that is here works, but for a game that takes 4 months to play, which means the player is going to be spending a lot more time in this world thinking about these things, there really, at least in my opinion, has to be more. More variety in the lengths of the replies, if you play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, one of the things that really makes that game work is the variety and lengths of replies. Sometimes you're just getting a short reply like, we went there was nothing there. And then occasionally you get this giant long 2-page spread of a really dense, detailed description of a scene. And we don't get that here. All of the replies are reasonably generous, but they're all the same basic length. There's never room in this mechanical system for a longer reply or a longer document. We never got a big, long autopsy report with diagrams and people, things like that. None of that ever happened. It's always just one of your investigators writing to you in a sort of friendly way, never with very much information in each given reply. And on a related note, one of the other genres that's sort of adjacent to the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detectives are these document realistic cold case games where you're getting a whole dossier of things like full police reports, autopsy reports with diagrams, maps. And it's a real shame that this system doesn't make use of some of that and have occasionally it send you not just these half-page letters from each investigator, but an investigator saying, hey, look what I found. I found this trove of documents you should look at. And especially if you think about one of the real features of this format of playing by mail that you're sort of working off of is this idea of surprise and anticipation of waiting for the reply to come in the mail. So they didn't need to do that much to make it so that when you're looking for that mail, you're excited. Am I going to get a letter this time? Or am I going to get a nice, full, rich set of documents? And there needed to be some of that. And there needed to be richer clues for us to dig into. Instead, it was always a very short session, just reading a short, casual reply from one of our investigators. Never anything for us to really stare and read through 3 times the way we do sometimes in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. The cases need to be harder too. If you're going to spend 4 months with a case in the back of your mind, there has to be more to figure out. In both of these cases, well, in one in particular, we essentially understood the crime and who did it and why 3 turns in, 3 of 14 turns in. That means we spent months having basically solved the case already. And that's a problem. It's a problem in terms of the authors controlling how much information the player has and when, and it's also a problem with the design of the mystery for that to happen. Sometimes you can get around that with more side cases, more sort of side mysteries to figure out. These both games both really needed more of that here, more mystery. The other thing that was a real missed opportunity was sort of more interaction with our investigators. The framing of this makes that something that really could have been done. It's framed as if we're having correspondence with these investigators live while they're investigating the case. And we really very rarely get much personal information from these investigators. It's just like one line here and there giving us a little bit of flavor, but nothing ever happens to them. They're never in any danger. They're never really talking back and forth with us. They're just giving us their little reports, and I think that was a shame. Summarizing some quick, straightforward improvements then. Live up to that promise of there being an active antagonist trying to thwart your case and interactions for your investigators to have in the world. Lean into the unique advantages of the play-by-mail format to create some surprise, some suspense, some excitement when you get something cool in the mail. Embrace the idea of having events that get triggered and consequences for the player's choices, especially if we're choosing where investigators go, and that's an interesting aspect. Lean into that more, make that more significant, more interesting, more surprising. If the gameplay is going to take several months, make it feel like things are changing and the case is unfolding over this long course of days. And if there are going to be week-long gaps between turns, give the players something to do a little bit in that time rather than a 5-minute reading through it and understanding everything easily. Maybe have some puzzles in those letters that come through, things that you have to work at that might take you a couple days to solve. Now I'm going to talk about some perhaps more intrusive ways to change and fix some of the flaws that at least I found in the system. And that would be by leaning into this play-by-mail format a little bit more, and the kinds of people that would enjoy a play-by-mail game that's stretched out over months. I've talked about how I really like and how clever the 3 investigators system is. However, if you really wanted to lean into this long format game, you might consider actually giving up that idea, that very clever idea of having 3 investigators, and just really lean into the long format game with a single investigator. If you did that, you could essentially drag out the game even longer, because you're not taking 3 turns at a time, you're taking 1 turn at a time. And have an investigator who's responding to you, replying to you in a much more personal, engaging way that the player would come to view as a friend that they're really developing a relationship with. Let the replies be longer. For example, right now we send 3 investigators and we get a 3-page reply back. Well, you would change that. You would have 1 investigator, but he would send you long 3-page replies. Maybe that investigator wouldn't just go to one place. Maybe you would have a couple of alternative places that he would go or she would go when she had spare time. Maybe you would pick a place they would go and they would pick a place they would go, and so the game could sort of steer you in certain places. That would give you some room to have the replies give you a little sightseeing tour. One of the enjoyments of these kinds of games is going back to a different time and place, and that would give you the room for the investigator to give you a little bit more history of what's really going on in that world and make it feel like you're having a conversation with someone back in time. And maybe that would give you the room to have conversations with this person that were more personal. They could share stories about their personal life, ask you how you were doing, etc. You get the idea of leaning into this kind of the idea that someone's having a relationship and a real pen pal with the investigator in the game. Another thing you could do is lean into the idea that the player is actually an active participant in the case as it's trying to be solved. In these games, the player is not mentioned. You're not actually playing this game. You've got 3 investigators, for example, in the Sherlock Holmes case, and they're working for Sherlock Holmes. When you make your moves, the replies come in, the replies are to Sherlock Holmes. They say, we went here as you suggested and this happened. But you could imagine a case that was framed more like, here's an active case, like an active kidnapping, and it's your job to save that person before they die. And then the replies would be a much more immediate feel, like you are responsible for getting it right. And the letters could write back and say something like, you told us to go here, but when we got there, we had gone to the wrong place, and you're responsible for the death of this person. You get the idea. Much more interactive back and forth involvement of the player in the case. And doubling down on the idea of consequences for making the wrong choices. You could also lean into the idea that the enjoyment for some people is just going to be the novelty of getting these replies in the mail. That's why having the case go even longer might work. And you might even consider the idea of after the game finishes, have your investigator put you on sort of a longer schedule of getting occasional mail from that person. So you could imagine you're playing the case, getting a reply every week, and then maybe after you solve the case, or maybe it even drifts out. So maybe like the case gets solved and then a month it goes cold, and then a month later you get a follow-up about the trial, and maybe you're asked to make some decisions in the trial. And you could even stretch that out and imagine someone getting a letter a year after they played the game, just with a little epilogue update. Lean into that novelty, cool experience. Maybe get a postcard from the investigator while they're on vacation, etc. There's also a little bit of a problem in this game in terms of visiting places that don't seem immediately important. When we play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you're sitting at the table and you're like, that seems like a fun place to go. That's mentioned in the newspaper. Let's knock on that door, even though it's probably not relevant to our case. While we're playing this game, that's harder to justify because we know it's going to take a week or 2 weeks to get a reply. It's another complaint of this game. I think for a game where you're really waiting by the mail, the fact that we occasionally had to wait 2 weeks for a reply was a real problem. I think you could really, it's important to get that turnaround faster. If the mail takes 3 days, then you should aim for getting, it's all automated, so you should ideally aim to get these replies in the mail to people much more quickly. Okay, but what I was saying was, while you're playing this game, you're like, well, that seems like a funny place we might go, but it's probably not going to be that relevant to my case. Do I really want to risk waiting 2 weeks to get that reply? And I've been playing for 4 months. Do I really want to make this drag on for 6 months just so I can go to a couple of places that might be funny or might be useless? And I think that's a problem here. There's no super easy way to solve that. But you could imagine a couple ways. One might be that when you finish the case, maybe let the players see what's in all of these locations that they didn't visit. Let them just browse through. And that would be an interesting way to be able to look behind the curtain and see what stuff you might have missed. This game doesn't let you do that. If you play normal Sherlock Holmes, you could go back after you finish the game and look at all the clues you didn't read. There's no way to do that here. That's a real shame. But you could also maybe figure out ways to have, perhaps instead of each turn putting in 3 locations, maybe let the players always keep a sort of a queue of locations that they're sort of curious about. And then occasionally, if the game was ever going to give you like a short reply about one location you visited, it might say something like, oh, I also decided to stop by the laundromat to do this. Have a way of sort of filling in those fun places when there's short answers and when there's short answers in your normal queries. Maybe that would also make it so that you wouldn't have to create a long response for everything. You don't want to give people a short response in the mail because they've waited now a week or 2 to get that response. So you're puffing up some locations that shouldn't be. And maybe if you let people give you a queue of additional locations, it would be okay if you occasionally gave someone a short one, because then you would fill it in with, oh, I also went here, here, and here. Just an idea. Lastly, let's talk about some even bigger changes that you might consider if you're considering making a game like this. I think the most tempting one is to do a kind of hybrid of the subscription-based cold case type of games, like the Hunt-A-Killer subscriptions, and a game like this. So in the Hunt-A-Killer subscription model games, you're basically each month getting a box. It's a box of documents that feels completely new, full of puzzles that you might chew on for a couple of hours. And then when you're done, you've learned a little bit more, you've solved a little bit of mystery, and then you wait in the mail, you wait for the delivery of the next box. The next box is already pre-designed, pre-made. It has nothing to do with your previous, nothing to do with how well you did or any decisions. You don't make decisions in each box. You just solve the puzzles and try to guess the right answer. You could imagine a hybrid system where essentially the game might consist of maybe 12 envelopes or boxes, but where when you got the box, like when you get a reply here in the mail, you decide where to go. You decide what to tackle. And in that case, you could imagine the most straightforward way would be you get a box, you've solved some puzzle, and you've got some choices. Do you want to follow this suspect? Do you want to follow this suspect? Do you want to try to break into this place? Do you want to try to solve this little mini crime? And based on that choice would control what you get in your next mailing. You could go even further and have that mailing somehow customized with a custom reply based on some choices you make. I think that would be extremely compelling because you would combine the excitement of getting new puzzles and new documents and a totally new experience each month, each week, or whatever. But you'd also capture the aspect of the mystery that these games do, which is giving the players an active choice about what to do and what to pursue in what order. And maybe make more of a mystery to solve that the subscription boxes like Hunt to Kill or don't tend to have. They tend to have like, answer these questions from this puzzle, and then that's it. You never need that box again. And there's a story that's developing, but you're not really faced with a very difficult case where you have to keep going back through the old documents and old notes. And I think if you combine those two, you might get a very compelling hybrid game. Again, that's not a knock on this company for not making that, but just an idea. You could summarize everything I've said into the idea of leaning into the unique benefits of a play-by-mail system. Hope you enjoyed that review. I'll see you next time.